Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and I have a spooky class build for you all, and one I'm honestly really proud of. This is such a good class build, and not only that, Halloween is coming up this weekend, so this is really good for anyone who might be having some, some one-shots coming up for the Halloween season. And in fact, speaking of, this Halloween at, I believe, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we are going to be doing a Bloodborne one-shot using some modified rules for Pathfinder 2e, which I'm very excited for. So if you're interested in checking in any of that, please check us out live on Twitch and on YouTube next Monday, and which is Halloween. So on Halloween, if you're not busy at that time. And might as well get this all out. If you're enjoying these builds, at least leave a like. It really helps out the channel. And if you want to see more, please subscribe. We got a lot of builds on the channel. I review a lot of things that come up on Pathfinder 2e, at least that's player side. And we also have a Discord, a link down in the description, where we talk all things tabletop, including exploring other tabletop games and war games like Warhammer 40k. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, check us out down below. But let's go ahead and talk about the build for today. This is going to be a Druid class build, and this is going to be different than a lot of my builds. This build is going to be a very point for point, exactly this style build for this particular character, more or less, archetype, whatever you want to call it. A lot of this, I'm expecting people to substitute and take in things they like, dislike, to do their own spooky builds with, even with other classes, though this one is very much a good Druid build, and one of the things I really wanted to do with this build was to make the Druid class really, really cool. I think the Druid class is already really, really good, but this is just going to make it even cooler, and a lot of the mixing is just going to fit really well in. So, this build I've called the Envoy of the Lantern King. Now, I don't know if there's actually any deities or anything like that that are more like, Halloween themed or anything like that, and I was really struggling to think of a name. The Lantern King is a big, fiery, creature from the first world, of a divine fae entity who enjoys mischief and trickery. And he just seems like the perfect fit for the naming convention and lantern, So that's why I picked the name. I do think it's a really cool name, and I think the aesthetics fit, but hey, maybe you lore junkies out there know something more Halloween-y, at least involved with Galarian's lore, that this might have fit better with. Regardless, it's really good, and the Lantern King is also just a really cool entity in the Galarian, well, I guess I'm Galarian technically, but in the Pathfinder mythos. All right, so we're going to start off with something I don't normally start off with, which is the ancestry for this build. You're going to be playing an Ifrit Heritage Leshy. I did check, there's nothing that prevents you from doing so, other than the fact that technically Ifrit is uncommon for access, but most DMs I don't think would have a problem with it, not like Ifrit is really all particular that good. And we're going to be picking, aesthetically, the Gourd Leshy, despite not actually picking one of the heritages, because you're a jack-o'-lantern. You're playing a pumpkin jack-o'-lantern Leshy who has flaming eyes. It's a really cool aesthetic, and there's some really good feats mixed in here as well with the two in combination. So we have our perfect little pumpkin boy or girl or nondescript that is going to be causing mischief and working as a agent of chaos for the Lantern King, and a spooky kind of perfect build. Now, as far as backgrounds, I've never been one to really be very particular about backgrounds. The only thing I'm going to state is that you're going to want a background that gives you the stealth kind of, or stealth as one of the skills. That's the only thing I would really recommend picking up for this build, especially because Leshy's kind of dumb. They don't got a lot going on in the big gourd. They get the intelligence penalty, which does mean they suffer from skill loss. Thus, whatever skills we're going to need for the build probably need to be picked up through the background. You could also do performance as well, or intimidation. All three of these do work, but whatever works. The lore skill doesn't really matter, nor what feats really matter. Pick something that you like. Your Divine Agent of Chaos is going to be your own unique little pumpkin. All right, so starting with the attributes. Wisdom, because Druid, yeah, it's Wisdom. I was gonna check, but no, Druids. We're a spellcaster. We want enemies to fail our checks for our spells. Just hard invest into Wisdom. There's really no need not to in this situation, and yeah, this is really good. Next is going to be actually a tie between Dex and Charisma. They should try to be as even as you can with them, because both are going to be very important for this build. Dex is good for good AC. Charisma is good for what we're going to be using it for, which is going to be a lot of intimidation. So mixing the two as much as possible, making them both as good as you can, is going to be very important. So they kind of tie for the second place position on this list, and whatever else really doesn't matter. I guess intelligence if you want, but you're going to be facing off against the penalty that the Leshy gives you for being a Leshy. So I don't know, but putting a little intelligence in might not be too harmful either. The skills we're going to focus on for this build is going to be intimidation and stealth tie, because they're going to be a very big important part of the build, and they're going to be some really fun stuff we're going to use with them. So getting those both up as much as you can is going to be very helpful. Next is actually performance, because we're going to need expert in performance for something we're going to pick up a little bit later. Other than that, if you got the skill proficiencies to add to it, which I couldn't really find too many of, whatever floats your boat for the build. So the Druidic Order we're going to pick up is going to be the Leaf Order. One, because Goodberry is a really good focus spell. I really like it in general. But two, because you get the Leshy Familiar feat, which the Leshy Familiar is actually going to be very helpful for this build in some ways. And I do love it. I do love the idea of a little pumpkin, mini teeny pumpkin who is your little compatriot in all this, and an agent of chaos and mischief with you as well. There's a lot of really cool things that we're going to be doing with the Familiar in this build. So I really recommend the Leaf Order specifically. And with the Leaf Order, we do get at least a proficiency in diplomacy, which is good because we are technically an envoy or a representative of the Lantern King. So having at least some diplomacy does make sense, but our character is not going to be very great at it, I'll tell you, by the end of this. Beyond that, we're going to be going through the level ups one by one for, what we're selecting. Now, of course, depending on how many skills you start out with, try to pick up stealth, intimidation, and performance when you can. I'm going under the assumption that you're keeping the -2 or the -1 to your intelligence from Leshy. So when you pick out your initial skill proficiencies, you're going to get nature, diplomacy, and then you're going to pick up intimidation. Because hopefully, or whatever you didn't pick up from your background, but you do need intimidation or stealth. We're going to need those pretty early on. So intimidation or stealth if you don't already have one of those two. So level 1 from our ancestry, we're actually going to be picking up Sinister Appearance from the Ifrit ancestry. My apologies. Well, 1 is a heritage, but 2 I had completely forgotten. So Sinister Appearance we're picking up from our Ifrit heritage gives us trained proficiency in intimidation. I did prep for our dumb little gourd. So at level 1, you probably pick up performance or stealth, depending on what your background had. Either way, we get intimidation through here, so no need to worry. And not only that, Sinister Appearance gives us the intimidation or intimidating glare skill feat, which is really good. Means that there's no language barrier between our intimidation attempts, which is not actually super important, but is actually still really good nonetheless. You also get a circumstance bonus to attempt to impersonate a tiefling. I don't know how that works exactly with Leshies, but okay, I guess. There might be a really fun moment, and considering this character's archetype, it's really, really good. Oh, and actually, speaking of the archetype in general, I didn't even mention what this build is for. This is a druid build that is all about distracting, keeping enemies busy, and overall just making life miserable for a few enemies on the battlefield to help kind of assist your team in fighting off a larger group of enemies. You're really good at keeping enemies at bay, being very, you know, like all over the place, trickster-esque, and this is a very mischief-based character. So you're a really good distraction character, you have some good crowd control, and you're really good at keeping some even maybe dangerous enemies at bay with this build. So at level 2, and also something else I forgot to mention about this build. Normally, I make my builds as vanilla friendly as possible to make this as viable as many tables as I can. This is not the case for this build. This build will be using the free bonus archetype rule so that we can get a lot of really cool things in the build, and as well, people have been asking for it. I won't do this all the time, but for very specific builds like this one, I will be adding the free bonus archetype rule into consideration. So at level 2, we're picking up the Order Explorer, and we're going to be picking up the Fire Order as well. For one, pumpkin-y aesthetics, there's some also really, or not pumpkin-y, but, you know, jack-o'-lantern aesthetics, but there's also some really good, you know, additional feats that we're going to pick up that require the Fire Order. On top of that, with our free bonus archetype, we're going to be picking up the Shadowcaster archetype dedication. It's going to be giving us a lot of cool, shadowy, Halloween-y style powers, and the dedication itself is going to give us the Cloak of Shadows domain spell, which is really good, and that gives us another focus point as well. I do love Cloak of Shadow. If you want to see more about it, you can go and watch my Shadowcaster archetype video that came out very recently. It's a really, really good one. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't do the archetype dedication. I used it in another build, the Dark Solace build. So, I guess I should read it then, huh? Okay. So, essentially what it does is that you drape a target in a moving aura of a 20-foot emanation of dim light. This is a form of magical darkness and can therefore overcome non-magical light or attempt to counteract magical light. Really good. It allows you to, on yourself or an ally, make it easier for them to gain the benefits from being concealed in dim light, as long as the enemies don't have dim light perception themselves. In any regard, it's a really good one for helping stealth in some situations. And again, not the reason why we're picking up the dedication itself. It's just a good added bonus. You do lose access to any spells that have the light trait, so you do need to be careful on what fire-based spells you do select to aesthetically go with this build, but in any regard, it's still really good. Alright, and something else unique with this style of this video in particular is I'm going to be telling you when to improve certain trained proficiencies or to improve certain skills. I'm not going to go into all the general feats and make this a very granular build, but we do need to make sure our skill proficiencies are at certain levels at certain times. So it is important that I put this in the build. And at level 3, we're going to be picking up trained in performance or stealth, depending on whichever one you didn't select earlier. So, trained performance, trained stealth. At this point, you should be trained in, at the very least, intimidation, stealth, and performance. If you happen to be trained in all of those, go with whatever you see fit, or make expert with whatever you see fit. In any regard, again, I prepped for a dumb Leshy, so this is how we're going. All right, at level 4, we're going to be picking up Leshy Familiar Secrets. And the main reason is because they can get Grasping Tendrils. Now, there is a master ability that you can give your familiar called Spell Delivery. And what it does is you cast the spell, and in the same 2 action, or I guess it's just in the same action, or 2 actions, or 3 actions maybe. I don't think it specifies. In any regard, it's efficient because you also command your Leshy to go deliver the spell using their 2 actions to move if necessary and touch the target. The Grasping Tendrils increases our familiar's reach to 15 feet, meaning that because of our familiar, we're going to be able to deliver all touch-based spells at a 15-foot reach, or technically more, because your Leshy can move and then touch the enemy, which means you have the ability to make it where your Leshy extends all the reach of all touch spells. It's really, really good for yourself or for delivering spells that are beneficial to your allies. meaning you can save efficiency on movements with the casting of a spell. It's just really, really good overall. I really enjoy this idea, and it gives a lot of versatility to how you can use your familiar very interestingly in combat. I really, really do like this feat. And on the Shadowcaster side of things, we're going to be picking up Shadow spells. We're going to need it for a feat a little bit later, but the big thing is as well, you get access to a lot of really good spells that you can now add during your daily preparations, since we're a prepared spellcaster, that don't appear on the Primal spell list. So again, a lot more opportunities. We're picking this up for something a little bit later, but it's really good because it does also expand the spells that you can prepare every day. All right, so at 5th level, we're going to be picking up Heatwave for our Ancestry feat from the Ifrit Heritage, which is really good, and I really do enjoy it because you can essentially fireball your location, and because you would take fire damage from the spell, even if you somehow resist it for whatever reason, so you could actually set yourself up to resist it, you can blow yourself up in that moment, damaging any enemies near you, and then you immediately gain the benefits of concealment until the beginning of your next turn, which is really good, especially since we are going to be using stealth. You could actually use stealth to hide, and it doesn't say you can't use it to hide, technically, though it might be obvious where your location is. That doesn't matter, because if you become hidden, it does increase the flat check needed to hit you in the first place. So it's really good to suddenly create a big bang, a big explosion, and then to make yourself much more difficult to hit. It's a really good reaction that you can pick up with the Ifrit Heritage. And at this level as well, we're going to be picking up Expert in Stealth. So you're going to want to get your stealth up here at this point at the very least. All right, so at level 6, we're going to be picking up the Advanced Elemental spell, because now we're a part of the Flame Flame Order. So that means we can pick up Combustion. This also will cap us out at our 3 focus points, meaning we got a lot of focus points to do a lot of really cool stuff with. And Combustion's a really good spell. I'm going to look at it here. It is a spell that does 4d8 fire damage at a range of 120 feet, mind you. It's 2 actions to cast, and 2d6 persistent fire damage based on a basic fortitude saving throw. If they succeed, they still take half the damage, but they don't take the persistent damage. But if they fail, it's bad times, and if they crit fail, it's even worse. This has pretty decent damage scaling through the game as well, and persistent damage is nothing to sniff at for sure, and then persistent damage keeps scaling with it. So as long as the enemy is not resistant to fire damage, this is going to be a really good focus spell to mess them up. It's a really good option. And on the Shadowcaster side of things, we're going to be picking up the Enhanced Familiar feat. And there's a really good reason for this. So I did mention earlier the benefits of having a familiar, and I did mention one of the master abilities that we're going to pick up with this build as well. The Enhanced Familiar gives you 4 familiar abilities, familiar or master abilities, rather than 2, so your familiar has access to more abilities on top of the one Grasping Tendrils that we got from the Leshy Familiar Secrets. The reason why I selected this one specifically is because there are a lot of specific feats that Shadowcasters can give their familiars, even if they're not a Shadow Familiar specific familiar. One of them, for instance, is Shadow Step, a really good one. It allows you to essentially have your familiar teleport, though you do need to be able to cast 7th level spells. Regardless, they teleport 30 feet, really good for espionage, all kinds of really interesting things. Another really good one as well, and I'm looking at the list here because I didn't prep ahead of time because I'm bad. Dark Eater's okay. It allows your familiar to more easily regain hit points, which is not bad if you're doing a lot of missions with your familiar. Obviously, having them be able to regain HP by sitting in a dark place, hiding more or less, is really, really good, honestly. Obviously, we're going to be wanting to pick up Skilled if we are using our familiar for missions, because they allows them to choose stealth as one of their proficiencies, and the modifiers for the skill is equal to your level plus your spellcasting ability modifier, meaning that your high wisdom is going to be able to benefit your familiar's stealth abilities. Really, really good, honestly. And plant form allows our little Leshy familiar to turn into a seemingly normal little teeny pumpkin or plant of some variety. So it's really good. And it's the necessity to have as many feats or ability to pick this up. I mean, there's also other really good master abilities like Spell Battery, which gives you additional spell slot at 3 levels lower than your highest spell level, or what's it called? Familiar Focus, which allows you once per day to restore a focus point while focusing on your familiar. All these are really good, and so the more feats our familiar has access to, the better. We don't even have to go into specific familiars to make a really good familiar, especially considering our familiar is essentially gets the benefit of being a shadow familiar without being one, and being a plant familiar for being a plant. There's a lot of really good versatility and utility into this build, and this is a really good place to pick it up as well. A very smart player can get a lot of good uses out of your familiar in this with the aid of these abilities. At 7th level, we're going to pick up Expert in Performance, and it is very important that we get Expert in Performance and Expert in Stealth by this point, and I'm sure for those of you who know the game know the reason why now. At 8th level, Dark Archive was such a good book because they gave so many really interesting feats to the Druid, one of which we're picking up here, which is perfect for this build. It does require that you're trained in Intimidation and Stealth, but what it does is, as long as you're hidden from a creature, you can demoralize the creature without losing your hidden condition, which is really, really good. It allows you to, in a situation where the group hasn't engaged with an enemy, you can mess with people. You can mess with NPCs, enemies, whatever, sneaking around in the darkness, making it hard to find you, and spooking them at the same time, even causing them to chase you into some dark woods if they're a guard or something. This is really good, and as a ranger and druid feat, this is such one of my favorite feats. You don't understand how good this feat is, really. There's a lot that this can be done, and there's so many really fun ways, and it fits perfectly with being an envoy of the Lantern King. There's some mischief, luring people away. It's very fey. It's perfect for this build. As far as our free bonus archetype, we're going to be picking up Shadow Spell, not to be confused with Shadow Spells. Shadow Spell is a meta magic where if you're using a spell that has the Shadow trait, you can give an ally that you're benefiting, or I guess yourself, but that's not very optimal. Don't do that. A +2 circumstance bonus, right? No, status bonus, which is really good, to stealth. Or if you're using it against an enemy, they get a -2 to perception. It doesn't even say perception checks. So I have to assume that it's going to be a -2 to perception checks and DCs, which is pretty bad, especially if you have an ally who's really good at feinting enemies, because I believe it does go against the perception DC of the enemy when you feint. Really, really good. It's a really good spell and adds a level of cooperativeness to the build. Not only are you the trickster who can lure enemies away, distract the enemies, do whatever, but you can now also build on team synergies by giving allies either bonuses to stealth along with your buffing spells, which I'll talk about that here in a bit, or to hamper an enemy's perception when you're using your really powerful spells on them. In any regard, it's a really good meta magic to have. At level 9, we're going to be selecting from the Leshy, finally our first Leshy feat, Spore Cloud, which is really good because it not only does this action use essentially your spellcasting DC, which we're a spellcaster and we're a very good spellcaster at that, so that's already going to make this a really solid one. But essentially what it does is for 2 actions in a 10-foot emanation, you can attempt to, if they it's a fortitude check. Basic fortitude check. Well, it's not even a basic fortitude check, but a fortitude check. If they succeed, enemies are dazzled for 1 round or until the beginning of your next turn. And if they fail, they're dazzled and blind to anything outside of 10 feet away, though they don't technically have the blind condition. It does say they can only see 10 feet away, so they're not fully blind, but they're blind for anything outside 10 feet, which that's also really bad for 1 round. And if they crit fail, they become blinded for a round. This is really good because it gives you an option that's not a spell to do stuff with. There's a lot of different interactions, and as just a pure ancestry ability that has pretty decent DC based on being a spellcaster, this is a really good one, especially for getting out of a very tough situation. And I can see all kinds of fun ways our little pumpkin lantern Leshy can use this for some shenanigans. And here at level 9, you can pick up Expert in Intimidation. It is very important, especially now that we have Eerie Environs. Now, when we're stealthing around, we can be spooking people a lot more easily. Demoralize is such a good action. There's all kinds of really good things in it, so boosting your Intimidation is really good. All right, so here at level 10, we're going to be picking up Fiery Retort. Another really good reaction to add to our druid, who doesn't have the most in reactions or reaction viability, honestly. It's a really good one. You can only do this once per minute, but since we're in the Flame Order, and if an enemy hits us with a melee strike that is not reach or an unarmed attack, they take an amount of damage equal to your level. Yes. Of fire damage. It's a really good reaction. You hit the little pumpkin, it explodes in fire in their face. It's really it makes, honestly, hitting our little jack-o'-lantern dude here be just a nuisance. Attacking you is not good, but they have to deal with you somehow, so there's a lot of opportunities to just be a thorn in everyone's side, and Fiery Retort is such a good reaction. For our bonus Archtype feat, we're going to be taking Shadow Reservoir. This is really important, and I did get this wrong in the Dark Solace build, so this is a half-assed way of apologizing for that. Shadow Reservoir doesn't give you extra spell slots, but instead you can designate a spell for each spell level at least 2 levels or lower than your highest spell level, and these spells become shadow spells. This stacks perfectly with Shadow Spell because that means we can do a Stone Skin shadow spell that allows you to not only make our ally get a buff to their AC or get damage resistance, I think, for Stone Skin, but it's a shadow spell, so they also get a benefit to their stealth. Your Shadow Reservoir contains a single spell of each spell level at least 2 levels lower than your high spell level that you can cast from your spell slots. The spell must come from your spell list, and you must have access to it. And it must require a spell attack roll or a saving throw. Oh, it's spell attack. Oh, darn. Actually, I didn't read that part. Well, I'm glad I did now. Regardless, that doesn't matter because that means a lot of our damaging spells from our spell list that we're throwing and hitting enemies with, we can punish their perception with it. Now, there is some stipulations to this, and they don't have to be prepared. If you are a prepared caster, you just use one of your other spell slots and you empty it to use this spell instead, which is a good way to keep a very flexible spell list when you're a prepared spellcaster and you might not know what you're coming up in the day. Now you can put some of your really good spells in these spell slots or swap them for these spells for a really good effect. Now, if it is a attack spell that requires an attack roll, which most of them won't be, but some will, it uses the highest of the target's AC or will DC. And if it's a save, it uses the target's will save or whatever other save it would have been, whichever is higher. So this does give a lot more benefit to the enemy, but we are using this in conjunction with Shadow Spell to make it where they start taking penalties to their perception. And it's just a lot of good versatility in how we do it, and it allows you to have a more flexible prepared spell list, which I know a lot of people have issue with. Regardless, it's really, really good in this build specifically. At level 11, we're taking Master in Intimidation because Demoralize, I feel, will be more useful in more situations in combat than your Stealth Wall. So whenever we're going to boost to the next level of proficiency, we'll probably do Intimidation followed by Stealth. At level 12, we're going to get Call of the Wild. And this might seem very strange to you and very out of nowhere. We need it for another feat. And this was just the most appropriate place I could find in the build to throw it in, where we were still getting all of our really cool stuff first. But Call of the Wild is still good. It allows you to swap one of your spells by spending 10 minutes for a summon beast or animal, or summon plant or fungi, which is really good and has a very good aesthetic for this spell, because summoning creatures is also really good for distracting some types of enemies as well. And this allows you to essentially throw in whatever enemies or whatever kind of summons you need in some situations. I really do like it, and it's going to become even better here a little bit later. For our free Archetype dedication feat, we're actually going to go into the Shadow Dancer Archetype dedication. Now, again, you might be looking at me like, weird, why are you doing this? It's not as important, because actually Shadowcaster gets access to a lot of what Shadow Dancer performs. And also, by the way, this is why we needed expert in performance and stealth. But there are some unique feats that Shadow Dancer gets that will be really good for this build. And the initial dedication feat gives you a +2 circumstance bonus to stealth checks when you're in dim light or darkness. I think it speaks for itself there. I think I know what we're going to be using this a lot for in this build. Going around, and you also gain access to greater dark vision, which is really good. So if anyone uses the darkness spell at higher levels, the heightened levels that turn it into greater darkness, essentially, you'll still be able to keep your vision essentially in that, which is really, really good. Cloak of Poison. Oh, sorry. So for level 13, for our Ancestry feat, we're going to be picking up Cloak of Poison from the Leshy side of things. And it's really good for 2 actions. You can do this once per day. But for the next minute, any creature that touches you or damages you with an unarmed attack or melee weapon without reach takes 3d6 poison damage. That's really good. And again, it makes you such an offensive little nuisance that people just don't want to deal with, because hurting you doesn't help them either. They also get messed up by that. So Cloak of Poison is also really good. It is 2 actions, which kind of sucks. But if you're setting up an ambush or getting ready to annoy people, this is a really good setup. And honestly, 3d6 poison damage. There is actually not a lot of poison immune or even resistant enemies in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, actually. There are plenty, yes, but not enough that I feel like this isn't worth it. It's really, really good. As well, at this level, we're also going to be taking Master in Stealth. As for the same reason that we took Master in Intimidation, we're sneaking around, spooking people. They're really, really important, and it's just really good. At level 14, we're actually going to be taking Verdant Metamorphosis, a really good Leaf Order specific Druid feat. And what it does is essentially it turns us into a plant, which we already are, so that's not really a big deal. But the thing is that you get access to you can transform as, I think, just an action, right? Yeah, you can transform into a non-creature plant as a single action with the same effects as tree shape, not spell slots, and you can transform into any non-creature plant of this kind, which allows us to very easily hide in plain sight as long as you're in a natural environment that has plants, very easily for a single action, which is really, really good. Not only that, but if you rest in your transformed state for 10 minutes, you recover half of your maximum HP, which is really good. And if you spend a whole day in this form for whatever reason, you go to your max hit points and you remove all effects of drained, enfeebled, clumsy, and stupefied conditions, as well as poisons and diseases of 19th level or lower. This is a really good feature. You can use it for shenanigans. It makes you very self-sufficient. It fits so perfectly in with the build. At level 14, we're dipping back into Shadowcaster, where we're going to be taking Unending Emptiness, where we get access to the Dark Light Domain spell, because it's just a really good spell, super handy for this particular build, and it's a good way to utilize darkness without affecting your allies. So what it does, and if you didn't watch my Cleric video on the Dark Solace build, is you create a 20-foot burst anywhere within 120 feet, and you can designate a number of people who are not affected by this. For creatures that are affected by it, though, even creatures with dark vision, but not greater dark vision, will suffer from, everything in it will be concealed to these creatures. And not only that, but they will take 2d6 bludgeoning damage and 2d6 negative damage with a basic fortitude save whenever they enter or start their turn in this field, allowing you to drop this on your allies so you can spare from Dark Light's effects, meaning your allies will be generally protected, concealed to enemies, and not taking the damage. It's up to 4 allies, so that's something to keep in mind. But it's a really, really good spell, has really good utility, versatility, does decent damage. You can sit in the zone yourself and benefit from it completely because I don't think, actually, maybe it's only allies. I would assume that you could use it on yourself because I don't know why you couldn't use it on yourself and on allies. But if not, whatever you can use on your allies, still a really good spell overall. At level 15, we're getting our first legendary in Intimidation because it's really, really good. And then we can get access to something like Scare to Death, which is also really good for this build. At level 16, we're picking up Primal Summons, and this is why we picked up Call of the Wild. So what Primal Summons does, and I was a fool for not pulling this up when I was intending on looking at it, but you gain access to the Primal Summons focus spell, which is another focus spell. Something to keep in mind. But essentially, whenever you use the summon animal or summon plant or fungus, so we can summon our own flaming jack-o'-lanterns because you can imbue them with an elemental trait as a free action as a part of casting the spell. And for fire, the creatures deal an additional d6 fire damage and gain resistance of 10 to fire and a weakness 5 to cold and water, which cold and water are not very common enemy effects, depending on where you are. And extra fire damage on our giant summons that we're going to be able to summon to get in people's way. I love the idea of summoning giant jack-o'-lantern creatures. I just think it's really cool, and it fits with this build really, really well. So I really like Primal Summons. This is just something I picked for a lot of aesthetic appeal. Plus, I do believe genuinely summoning is really, really good. For our free archetype for this level, we're going to be picking up Shadow Magic, not to be confused with Shadow Spells, Shadow Spell, Shadow Magic, lots of shadow, where we're going to pick out Dance of Darkness from either Shadow Dancer, it doesn't really matter, Shadow Dancer, or from your Shadow Caster. You can get either one, technically. It's the same thing either way. And Dance of Darkness is really good because for 2 actions, you can stride up to half your speed, and at the end of your stride, you create a 10-foot burst of magical darkness. And this magical darkness is the same effect of a darkness spell created at the same level, so heightened to at minimum level 5. And when you create the darkness, you can attempt a performance check to dance with a standard DC for your level to determine the duration of the darkness. Meaning that performance that we've been adding to our character over time here will actually matter for the sake of this build, as it determines how long this extra darkness does last. This does allow you to maneuver in or out of combat and create darkness that enemies may or may not have. It's a really good versatile spell that you can use in a lot of different ways, especially leading enemies away, because you can use that darkness to then sneak and hide away while they're currently blind in a set of darkness. It's really, really good. At level 17, we're taking Blazing Aura from the Ifrit Heritage. It's another reaction. I love adding reactions to spellcasters, especially because they don't get a lot. Once per day, at the beginning of your turn, you can create a 20-foot emanation that does 7d6 fire damage on a basic reflex saving throw with a DC equal to your class or spell DC. Spell DC, important. And allies in the zone are quickened for 1 round and can use the additional action to strike or stride. This is, again, really perfect for our little jack-o'-lantern friend here, going in, sneaking into the midst of the enemies, exploding, or starting out the combat by making your allies just really, really fast. A lot of good utility, a lot of good versatility. There are so many really, really good things, and it's a reaction at the beginning of your turn, which is very solid. In addition to Blazing Aura, we're also picking Legendary in Stealth, so that we're very stealthy and also very intimidating. At level 18, we're picking up Effortless Concentration. It's really good. There's a lot of good Druid spells that do require some sustaining actions, like our summoning spells or for our Primal summons. So with this Effortless Concentration, it allows you to maintain a lot of those spells a lot more easily. And on top of that, you can have 2 giant jack-o'-lantern creatures doing fiery damage at the same time, because you can, as a free action every round, sustain one of your spells. So yeah, this is just a really, really good combination. I felt it really fit this build, and for whatever other spells you decide to select that do have sustained, this can work with those as well. And on top of that, we're also picking up one of the feats that we needed the Shadow Dancer for. We needed Shadow Dancer to pick up Shadow Master, which is really, really good for an 18th level feat. And essentially what it does is that whenever you're in dim light or darkness, you gain resistance 5 to all damage except force and damage from ghost touch ruined weapons. And whenever you attempt a reflex saving throw in an area of dim light or darkness, you can roll twice and take the higher result. And this is a fortune effect. This is really good because not only is our character so just going to be in darkness all the time, creeping around doing whatever, but they're also just taking less damage. They're making their life... Our druid is such not a good target to focus on, despite how much of a nuisance they are, because they take less damage, they deal damage back, they do all kinds of really nasty things when you hit them. It's just so good. I absolutely love it. It's a really good skirmishing kind of druid build that lets you get in, cause chaos, get out, or lure enemies away, keep enemies distracted, whatever you want to do. This build offers all of it. It's so good. At level 19, we're going to get Master in Performance so that our darkness has a higher chance of lasting longer. No other reason. You can put anything else in here I want, but you don't have a lot of skill proficiencies in this build anyway, so you might as well just bump your performance. And at level 20, we're taking Hierophant's Power. It makes a lot of sense for an Envoy. If you've gotten to level 20, you're super strong. At this point, you get an extra 10th level spell. Super good, lot of good. There's a lot of really good 10th level Primal spells that you can do a lot of things with. So I do highly recommend it, even though it's not super thematic. It does and can represent your character getting essentially a boon from the Lantern King to show that you are truly his representative by getting access to world-shaking magic, or at least another spell slot. So really, really good. For our bonus Archetype feat for level 20, we're picking up Shadow Power, which allows you to cast Shadow Blast as an additional spell once per day. It does use your Occult spell. It's okay. It's just an extra spell slot. Does damage. Shadow Power makes a lot of sense. You can literally throw in what other ever kind of Shadowcaster or Shadow Dancer feats you want into the slot. Shadow Power was just the one I felt was the most appropriate, and I think if you select it with Shadowcaster, you don't need to use the Occult spell. You can use your own spellcasting dedication with it, which is even better, honestly. So with that, we are done with the build, actually. I'm not going to go into one. There's no point in putting free archetype recommendations because this uses free archetypes. And 2, gear for magic casters is always hard. I'm sure there's a lot of good ones. But also, this video is almost an hour long for me as of recording this now. So I don't want to do that. Instead, I'm just going to let y'all decide. And I don't even need to go into ancestries or anything. This is just the whole build. I hope y'all like it. I think this is a really, really good build, especially for Druid, especially when using the bonus archetype rules, and you can see exactly the kind of stuff that bonus archetype really offers to a character. There's a lot of it isn't direct power gain as much as it is just giving your character a lot more options to do stuff in combat, and Pathfinder 2E's horizontal leveling is so good. So this is the build. I hope you like my Envoy of the Lantern King build. I think it's a really solid one. Let me know down in the comments what you think about it, or give us some of your really cool builds in our Discord. We have a whole Discord section dedicated to the builds that you guys make, and people are putting builds in it like every day. So there's a lot of good options and people there making good discussions as well. But with that, it's gonna be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.